special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Hi everyone, and welcome to TEDx St. Francis High School 2022. As we begin this event, please give a warm welcome to our principal, Mrs. Katie Teagle.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to TEDx St. Francis. I could not be, that's good, little applause. I can't tell you how happy I am to not be speaking to just a camera in an empty auditorium. So it's wonderful, thrilling, really, to have everyone back together for this incredible event. As both a principal and a mom, I'm not supposed to have favorites. But what I will tell you is this program, not just what you're about to experience tonight, but truly the entire program over the course of the past several months is one of my very favorite things that we do here at St. Francis. I don't know that there is any other experience for our students that truly captures for me what I hope the St. Francis experience will be really for all of our students, where students can find their voice, where they can develop the confidence and the courage to share their story, where they can draw connections that will help them to go out and make a difference in our world. You will hear that and more tonight. You will leave, as I do every year, inspired and filled with great hope at what lies ahead in the future with these amazing young people. So before we start our program, I would like to ask you to please join me in prayer. Let us begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving and gracious God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather today as a community to celebrate the voices of our students. We are grateful that you have given them the power and the strength to share their stories, and that you have endowed us with the capacity to hear them. We ask you to watch over our speakers and crew members who have worked so hard to make this evening possible, and that you give us the ability to listen deeply and fully to the words we are about to hear. May our experience this evening inspire us to likewise use our voices to bring hope to our world. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's have a great evening, everyone.
Hello, and welcome again to this year's TEDx St. Francis High School event. First off, a thank you to Mrs. Teagle for doing our opening prayer and first words. My name is Haley Flahaven, and this is my co-director, Caitlin Mahalko. We are seniors, as well as co-directors of the program. I'm so excited to share with you the culmination of 6 months of hard work in order to put on our event. From the very first day of school, and before that, if you include board applications, we have been slowly building up to this moment and this night. It feels almost surreal that we are here after countless hours, days, and weeks of preparation. All of what you see in front of you tonight is the dedication and passion of St. Francis students. And so, to begin, we want to give you a little overview of what we do here at TEDx.
First things first, this program is almost completely student run. From this intro script to the artwork behind us and to the decor in the lobby, we here at TEDx pride ourselves on empowering students to act on their curiosity, think outside the box, and use their voices to share their stories. Since 2018, this event has been held annually at St. Francis, where we began as SF Talks. From our first year on, the same components have driven us forward: student speakers, student voices. Following up to the present day, we are so fortunate to hold this event as our third year of being TEDx certified, meaning that we are just a small part of the summits, high school programs, and conferences under the TED organization. But back here in our lovely pack, our biggest mission with the event is to provide and nurture the message that our voices matter, our experiences matter, who we are, what has shaped us, and so on. And so, this is what we've come up with. What you see before you is the raw authenticity of our generation, getting down to the nitty-gritty and answering the question of what is your story, but more importantly, what can the world learn from you?
We couldn't provide all 13 of our student speakers the guidance to answer that question without an incredible community to support them. We are so lucky to have such a driven group of students working behind the scenes on this entire program. We would love to thank our co-director, Andrew Adkisson, our speaker directors, Philip Gu, Sarah Fazioli, and Kate Ang, our speaker board, Tricia Menon, Carter Adair, Stephen Head, and Menaham Mullick, our publicity, Leslie Garcia-Sanchez, and our publicity board, Nitya Kupareddy, our tech crew, Eliana Shin, and tech board and artist, Matthew Tran, our hospitality, Amelia Forrest, and our hospitality board, Andrew Carrasquillo. Our future directors of the program, Arhana Autrish and Claire Luo, and our AV team, Noah Crane, Lauren Pimentel, and Gabby Federighi. Additionally, our photographers, Paige Allen, Tej Tripathi, and Gabby Dominguez. This year's art piece was created by our tech board, Matthew Tran. The piece is entitled Cosmology and comes with this message. Not every single person will agree with certain talking points illuminated by our speakers tonight, and that is all right. There is a beauty to it because our minds form molds to respond to this chaotic influx of information. Like my artwork, even the meaning becomes lost in translation because so many different shapes can form from a pattern, and it all depends on how we see the world. Thank you, Matthew. And of course, our event would not be possible without our amazing moderator and mentor, Mrs. Leslie Shortle.
As you can tell, we're in person this year, which is super exciting. It's really great to have you all here for real human applause. And laughs. Thank you so much for that. It really is an absolute treat to have you here all with us to hear the next 13 talks ahead of you. So I just have a few housekeeping things before we begin. First off, masks must be worn correctly and at all times while you're inside the pack. All student speakers and everybody on stage has received proper clearance to remove our masks, and we've also all been tested. But please do your part to keep yourselves and everybody safe. I thank you for that.
If you are visiting or are unfamiliar with the pack, you should familiarize yourself with the door out there, which will lead to the lobby, and the 2 doors on the side, which are emergency exits.
For tonight's event, the talks will be structured into 4 separate blocks as listed in your programs. Each block will also have a break in between them, which will be about 10 minutes long, and we will also have our speakers and board members roaming around in the lobby. So please make sure to give them hello and a congrats on all of their wonderful work.
Yes. Another way you can connect with our speakers is to write them a comment card. We have a table outside with jars and notepads, so feel free to write a little something to any or all of our speakers.
Just a note on food, while we have provided some that can be found in the lobby, it will not be allowed inside the pack, so please step outside if you have any food or drinks. And finally, feel free to check us out on our Instagram at TEDxSaintFrancis.
TEDx was created with the philosophy, ideas worth spreading. For these student speakers to be here today, they've self-reflected on their own experiences and taken action on their curiosity to establish why their story is meaningful to you. Before we begin, we'd like to ignite your curiosity a little bit, so we're going to do a quick exercise. When we are younger, curiosity is our driving force, and it usually takes the form of questions. What happens if you put a shiny rock in your mouth? Why is the fire alarm a terrifying noise? Why do my feet hurt right now? Makes sense.
We are intrinsically curious beings wanting to know what's all around us. Over accumulating years and experiences, this exploration guides us and shapes us into both the people we are today and the people we will become. With no predetermined end in sight, we are left to our own devices to answer the largest question of them all. What is the meaning of life?
Now, before you go into the quite honestly terrifying endeavor of asking yourself the meaning of everything, I'll ask my co-director to see what she says.
There's one portion of the question that sticks out in terms of its linguistic anatomy, and it's the idea of meaning altogether. At a fundamental level, we are all machines that make meaning. The human process takes place through our consciences, sights, touches, or simply indulging in our literary book of choice, a textbook. Whatever medium suits your fancy, every day is seeing, believing, understanding, correcting, and questioning over and over again. The real meaning is subjective, crafted to our own personal opinions, experiences, and identities. But the beautiful thing is that they can be shared. Think of it like a never-ending series of journal entries, where over time you are able to write, postulate, and reflect on your own existence through the chronicles of your own pages. In essence, that may be the closest of an answer we can give you, because we believe the power is in the process.
One of the ways we can further this process is by coming together, and I hope tonight's presentation of dialogues brings you new perspectives to carry forward. From the first day of board application launch until this very moment, we bring to you the product of ideas, perspectives, and calls to action. Built on the communal love of open conversation and communication, we're able to bring the chance of a better understanding of ourselves, each other, and the world around us. TEDx here at St. Francis is unique and special, and on behalf of myself and everyone else on this stage, we hope that you enjoy yourselves and learn something new.
And now, to begin this journey, here to announce our first speaker is one of our own speaker directors and one of my best friends. Please welcome to the stage, Philip Gu.
Good evening, everybody. As Caitlin just mentioned, my name is Philip Gu, and I have had the honor and privilege of being one of the director of speakers this year. One of my main responsibilities as a speaker director was to work with a lot of the speakers we're going to be hearing from tonight, including our very first speaker who will talk about his experiences with caregiving. Now, caregiving can mean something different on a person-to-person basis because many people assume it includes anything from raising your children to listening to a loved one when they're down. For our first speaker, it's his journey as a geriatric caregiver for his grandmother, which will provide us an insight into what the reality of caregiving is really like. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage our very first speaker of the evening, Junior Alexander Chang.
The most impactful experience of my childhood was my family's discovery of Shrek. We love Shrek so much that we watched the Shrek musical 4 entire times, which, fun fact, is 4 more times than necessary. The reason why I still vividly remember this is because the musical inspired a practical joke my parents played on me. In the first act, Shrek's parents tell him that he needs to fend for himself as soon as he turns 7. I was 6.5 at that time. So imagine my fear when my parents also began jokingly telling me that I needed to pack my bags when I turned 7. Now, obviously, 7-year-old Alex didn't pack a rucksack and make his way down the Mississippi like Huckleberry Finn. But the joke still serves as a funny reminder of how far I've come in my own journey of independence. I certainly wasn't ready to take on the responsibility of fending for myself at that age, but as I've grown, I've realized that responsibility isn't something you choose to take on. Rather, it's often thrusted into your hands without you even knowing. About 2 years ago, I made the decision to move out of my childhood home and to live with my maternal grandmother. I always enjoyed spending time with her, but this time was different. I dreaded moving in. Not because I didn't want to be with her, but because I was scared of the reason why I was moving in. I was going to become her caregiver. My grandmother had already been experiencing a couple health complications, and following a couple surgeries, it only felt right to help her with her daily needs. These responsibilities, combined with balancing schoolwork and care, would take their toll on me. But I'm glad I took them on. Now, before I go more in detail on my story, I do want to shed some light on what caregiving is exactly. Most people don't quite know what it is, and frankly, I don't blame them. At the end of the day, caregiving is really only something you know about when you need it, as is what happened in my case. Caregiving is a branch of assisted living which covers people suffering from chronic illnesses to elderly patients who need assistance in daily household tasks. This definition might sound broad, but that's because the nature of caregiving is broad. More often than not, elderly patients require assistance in daily household tasks, and these caregivers specifically provide certain responsibilities for these patients. These responsibilities include hygiene, exercise, transportation, cooking, comfort, and a variety of other tasks specific to each recipient's condition. I'm what's known as an informal caregiver, which is the title given to family members and close friends of care recipients who take on the responsibility of a caregiver on top of their other commitments. Now, this is in no way an easy job for anyone, especially for someone who can't even get up early to make himself breakfast. Unfortunately, my combined experience as a caregiver and a student isn't unique. In fact, I'm only one out of 1.8 million other students who currently take on the responsibility of a caregiver on top of their education. Now, it's probably hard to imagine the life of a caregiver with just the definition of caregiving on its own, which is why I'd love to share with you what a day in my life might look like. Most of my responsibilities at home surround my grandmother's in-home dialysis treatment. At the start of every month, I place an order with the healthcare supplier Baxter to get my grandmother's dialysis materials. The orders vary by month, but they will almost always include gloves, cleaning solution, piping, and around 30 to 40 boxes of dialysis solution, which my grandmother uses at night. I also help my grandmother set up her equipment. The type of dialysis my grandmother is currently undertaking is known as peritoneal dialysis, which is conducted on an at-home dialysis machine. Now, the process to calibrate, sanitize, and run the machine is a complicated process that I won't go into, but just know that would probably give an engineer a mental breakdown. In addition to my grandmother's dialysis, I also help with my grandmother's daily household chores. My grandmother has a hard time moving around, so I try to limit the amount of time she spends moving unnecessarily. That entails cooking for her, bringing her to her doctor's appointments, and other tasks such as shopping and laundry. As I complete a lot of these tasks, I can't help but reflect on how my grandmother did these same exact things for me as she was raising me. And I'm more than glad to return the favor. Now, my experience as a caregiver certainly doesn't extend to all caregivers across the country, but you can probably imagine the amount of stress caregivers are under. Most caregivers report suffering from anxiety or depression due to their responsibilities at home. And as much as I'd like to say that I've stayed strong throughout, I haven't. Many days go by where I ask myself, why is this happening to my grandmother, the sweetest person I've ever known? Why is this happening to me? Why does it seem like after everything I've done, I've barely made a dent on our situation? I don't know the answers to these questions. No one does. There are millions of Americans with these same exact questions, and we're never going to find an answer to them. But there is one thing we can do. Reflect on how we're actually valuing our elders, because I can assure you that almost every single issue with geriatric care all boils down to respect. Let me show you what I mean. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services found last year that 3 out of 10 senior citizens currently living in nursing homes were abused within 2 weeks of admission. More than half of these nursing homes were constantly understaffed at any given moment in time. And 400,000 residents die annually from preventable infections. This is the reality of how we treat America's elderly. Calling it geriatric care sours the definition of care because we as a society don't care. I spent hours upon hours researching senior care with policy professionals, and our research has revealed abuse after abuse, neglect after neglect. And it pains me to see absolutely nothing happening. More often than not, our seniors are removed from their communities by their families to live in nursing homes or senior centers. But this isn't always the healthiest option. Most seniors are lonely and disconnected from the communities that they once had. As a result, in-home caregiving is preferable to outsourcing care to separate centers, but I understand that working Americans are busy. Providing for a family member on top of your personal life seems simply impossible. But that isn't the mindset we should have. At the end of the day, it's going to rest on us to create the change we need, because we're all going to get old. And if we can help our senior citizens now, we'll be helping ourselves in the future. Now, you're probably not going to do much with the swamp of information that I just gave you on geriatric care. But I do want you to consider this. If I can take on the responsibility of being my grandmother's caregiver, then you can take on the effort to support your family as well. Because at the end of the day, you're only going to be, it's only right for you to return all the love and support they gave you when you needed it the most, when they now need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, for sharing your story of being a geriatric caregiver. Caregiving is a medium through which we can influence each other's lives and further shape our individual experiences. But how do our distinct perspectives contribute to our perception of the world? Sharing the significance of personal interpretations, particularly in film, please welcome our next speaker, Senior Joseph Sherman.
Imagine yourself at the movie theater. There's the glow of the lights, the familiar smell of popcorn, the sound of the opening notes to a score, and the sight of two other moviegoers dressed as Ghostbusters being escorted outside for starting a fight. Because when there's two grown men and it don't look good, who you gonna call? The police. That's who. There truly isn't anywhere else like the movie theater, and I speak from the experience of working at one for a time. Despite the monotony of scanning tickets and sweeping popcorn, interrupted only by brief moments of excitement, my love and passion for film and storytelling has only continued to grow. I love the movies, and I'm sure you do too. Even if you don't dress up as your favorite on-screen characters when you leave the house, and after the Ghostbusters incident, I'd be okay if you didn't, I think we can all agree that there's always been something special about visual storytelling. From black and white to color, Buster Keaton to Jackie Chan, Citizen Kane to Terminator 2, seeing has always been believing, even as the art form and the industry have continued to change faster and more drastically than ever before. Specifically, the debate between the artistic and business aspects of filmmaking has been reignited to new proportions in recent years, with the rise of the superhero movie and the comic book genre, and an oversaturation of blockbuster sequels and reboots to beloved franchises. Changes to the industry have disproportionately affected the artistic and storytelling potential of film. There's currently a lack of attention towards original and meaningful stories being told, alongside a similar decline in the push for audiences to look deeper into the media most commonly presented to them. But that's not to say that the Marvel and DC cinematic universes are always a bad thing, or that everyone should have a film degree to fully appreciate and understand any kind of film. I am strongly against the exclusivity of film and art in general, which is why I greatly enjoy superhero movies and the role they play as easily accessible and digestible films. And it would also be a lie for me to say that all of these films are emotionless cash grabs void of meaning. For example, Spider-Man No Way Home and Denis Villeneuve's adaptation of Dune stood out to me as some of my favorite films of 2021, because despite them being a sequel and a reboot, elements of them that self-proclaimed cinephiles like me are known to criticize, they both make significant and successful efforts to communicate more than meets the eye. What can the character of Spider-Man embody that no other character captures? Why are the world and story of Dune different from every other science fiction epic we've already seen? The people responsible for these movies, that includes actors, writers, directors, composers, even visual effects artists, all understand these questions and communicate the answers to the audiences that stay on the surface and the ones that choose to look deeper. And the reason people, like me, usually like to criticize these films is simple. They're low-hanging fruit, and we have no self-esteem. Wait, that doesn't sound right. It's because we care about film as art, and the cash grab blockbuster is a threat to that, and to more people experiencing the intentionality of the art form that we love so much. It's no surprise that more and more of these intentionally accessible and digestible films are being released and greenlit by studios each year, while more unique films and filmmaking techniques are denoted as outdated financial risks, and therefore unprofitable. The decline in techniques like practical effects and the lack of stories that are able to parallel their emotion with their excitement is what has turned many films from an art form that takes years to perfect and can be enjoyed by anyone to rushed, unoriginal, and disappointing corporate products that can only be enjoyed under the best or worst of circumstances. For example, where The Dark Knight is a complex narrative of morally and emotionally diverse heroes and villains that have each left their own impacts on individuals and society as a whole, Independence Day Resurgence is widely regarded as a cheap recruitment ploy by the US Army after their reluctance to support the original film and makes no attempt at any deeper message beyond that. Another would be when Blade Runner 2049 interweaves the themes of identity and humanity from its predecessor into its more refined vision of a rainy dystopian Los Angeles. It highlights just how bad The Matrix Resurrections attempt at a sequel was to such a beloved series of films, wiping away nearly every thematic message that made the original stand out to make room for more meta jokes about Warner Bros. I know I sound harsh in my criticisms of these films, and I by no means intend to discredit the creative labor of hundreds that worked on them, but I say this again because I care. And beyond that, I was genuinely excited to see each of the films I criticized here, and therefore genuinely disappointed when they did not live up to my expectations. Universally enjoyed experiences turned to widespread guilty pleasures are simply not the same thing. Originality and patience are what create the most satisfaction in making and watching films, and it's what blockbusters most often lack when they fail to meet our expectations. To many big-budget studios today, the word originality simply means to go outside of tried and true formulas that franchises like Star Wars and Marvel have created, and any extra time or patience set on something is simply money potentially wasted. Because of this mindset, many aspiring filmmakers have turned to independent productions or even crowdfunding just to maintain control of their ideas and projects after being denied so in what is considered a professional environment. It all sounds hopeless that Hollywood, studios, and producers have denied access to so many of these talented individuals and their ideas, but I personally think it also works to prove the legendary writer-director Quentin Tarantino's words that the good ideas will survive. No matter how few of them there are produced or shown to us in theaters, they will be there. But it becomes our responsibility as audience members to find and appreciate them. As audience members and not professional critics of cinema ourselves, the fear is often that there is only one interpretation of intentionally complex stories, and that our potentially different opinions about them are simply incorrect, or even illegitimate due to our viewership as one of the masses. Beyond creating a stigma behind terms like art house and cinema and A24, this perpetrates the cycle of cash grab media and undermines the idea that different interpretations are essential for any kind of art to progress while maintaining its values. And the truth is that the only incorrect opinion you will ever have about a film is someone else's. And how a story makes you feel personally will always be more important than what Louis Bloom from Associated Press writes about it on Rotten Tomatoes, or how a user named Patrick Baseman ranked it on Letterboxd. So the next time we step into a theater, myself included, and the lights go down and the Ghostbusters are nowhere to be seen, let's all essentially fall asleep during the opening scene and wake up during the credits to ask what happened, Or let's take a moment to think about what it is we're watching, how it makes us feel, and what it might be trying to say, intentionally or otherwise. The decision is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, for conveying the relationship between filmmakers and the audiences that influence the originality of these films. Movies are a great way for filmmakers to communicate their ideas and perspectives with the masses. That communication is just as important in our personal lives. Our next speaker will share with us her journey utilizing communication as a way to overcome hardships. So please give a warm welcome to senior Lucy Coyle.
Our house always smelled like warm chocolate chip cookies, and my mom always picked us up on time. Until the day she didn't. I immediately knew that something was wrong, and my deep concern was confirmed when she called to tell me that there was a reason for my 8-year-old brother's recent headaches. The doctors had discovered a cancerous brain tumor the size of a baseball in little Luke's posterior fossa, or the lower left side of his brain. My family was staying at the hospital just down the road, rushing to prepare for surgery, and through our shared tears, my mom uttered the forbidden phrase, "This sucks." And just like that, the bubble of my perfect life popped, and things got messy fast. My efforts to manage my feelings surrounding my brother's diagnosis drove me into a fog of severe anxiety. I isolated myself, subconsciously fearing that letting others in would allow for another terrifying diagnosis to enter my life. After all, I had an image to uphold, that of a gal with her stuff together, who was never to be perceived as vulnerable or needy, and who could always stand on her own 2 feet, loud, proud, and perfect. I realize now that I had constructed a military-grade wall around myself to protect from the discomfort of authentic human interaction. And just as I had begun to scratch the surface of my pain surrounding my brother's cancer, we were all thrust into a global pandemic. Restricting social interaction even more was so great then. I was socially distant before it was cool, but beknownst to me, a shocking number of my peers had experienced parallel challenges at the very same time. When fearful, we all become prisoners of our minds, and to spare you the heavy details, it became clear that I needed a skosh of help. So I embarked on a journey of recovery, healing, and growth, which, surprise, surprise, required levels of communication and human interaction way outside my former comfort zone. There's chemical justification for what each of us is going through. People, especially kids and teens, struggle in continuous isolation, whether physical, mental, or emotional. There's actually a scientific reason why so many of us experience similar adversity. And whether that reality is initially comforting or not, let's take a look at the brain science underlying our collective reaction to pandemic-induced isolation. What's going on in each and every one of our minds? So, as we know, the brain is one vast complexity. The organ controls almost everything we do: thought, emotion, memory, even breath, essentially every process that regulates our bodies. For simplicity's sake, today we'll tackle one system, the limbic system, which spearheads, get it, our emotional processing. The limbic system presents as a tangled network of nerve cell structures that communicate with one another via electrical signals, sending everything racing through our minds into one singular place. Based on the information carried by those electrical signals, our limbic systems react by releasing one of 2 chemicals: cortisol, which sounds alert systems for conflict aversion and protection, or alternatively, oxytocin, which encourages collaborative and communicative skills and trust in others. While short-lived, both oxytocin and cortisol leave lasting effects on our patterns of thinking. With this in mind, medical professionals have concluded that as one experiences the trials and tribulations of everyday life, the limbic system provides changing responses, resulting in an emotional learning process. By being given the opportunity to learn in accordance with our feelings, we are able to think intuitively, identify what we value, strategically set goals, and organize culture, all skills that contribute to our development into well-rounded, socially interactive individuals. So, reining in all of this scientific jargon, we can apply this understanding of emotional learning to how we communicate. When we seek out friends to check in with or coworkers to chat with over lunch, we initiate the release of those feel-good chemicals. And by repeating that action, our brains are so beautifully designed to process and search for more of that positive feedback, leading people to yearn for that authentic human interaction. During the period of isolation, I developed a love for gardening. My collection of houseplants soon flourished into what my dad now calls a jungle, and the plants that sit on my windowsill are now perpetually drawn towards the light. In the presence of the sun, roots take hold, leaves sprout, and flowers bloom. Light fuels their growth. Similarly, human connection fuels our growth. But what actually defines that connection? Through interpersonal communication, we grow away from those anxious tendencies to self-isolate, and we benefit both ourselves and each other by means of human connection. Connection defines our culture and our sense of belonging, and in the words of Troy Bolton, we're all in this together. So true, Troy. When I was first told of my brother's cancer diagnosis, a wave of soul-crushing fear washed over me. But rather than cry, my preferred outlet in the face of stress, I recall wanting to talk to someone, anyone who knew more about this fear-turned reality than my mom and I. I gathered up the nerve to talk with one of my childhood family friends, a boy who, just like my little brother, had been diagnosed with a terrifying cancer just a year earlier that had absolutely rocked his and his family's worlds. I was the shy and awkward middle school girl, and Sean was a cute 8th grader. But by lending an ear to my worries and offering a few words of encouragement and support, Sean led me to believe that in the long run, things would all be okay. Talking to Sean was healing for me. So when we look at the big picture, we all need to seek out an accessible solution for communication apprehension. Simply put, we just need to reach out. In the wake of the challenges I've experienced, I made a significant effort to re-immerse myself in my community. I've built up resilience and relationships by stepping outside of my former comfort zone and protective fence, and worked towards more vulnerability in all facets of my life. I began by simply making a greater effort to casually chat with teammates on my cross-country team. And soon enough, I grew in confidence, both within myself and our relationships. I came to learn the importance of taking initiative. I started by talking about things I love in a safe space with people I love. And that same potential for relationship lies within each and every one of us. We have to be willing to take the plunge and lean into change. Simply asking how someone is doing or telling a silly story can lead to your next deeply meaningful relationship. Feeling overwhelmed and scared is totally natural, but once you start, the rest will follow. Today, I look at my journey and what has brought me to arrive at this point right here. Luke's cancer battle was incredibly tumultuous, but it was also a gift, oddly enough. I discovered a deeper understanding of myself and meaningful relationships that I hadn't known were possible prior, all because I let go and I reached out. So take a lesson from those plants in my bedroom. Soak in the light of human relationship. Allow it to fuel you to reach new heights, and in doing so, you'll stand tall and flourish. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, for sharing your story with us and conveying the importance of cultivating relationships as a part of our journeys of growth. Even though it may be tough sometimes, connecting with others can help us deal with hardships and build resilience. At this time, we will be having a 10-minute break in which you can talk to our speakers from our first block in the lobby. Afterwards, we will be hearing from our next group of speakers, junior Annika Baston, sophomore Ritika Arora, and senior Louis Chevet.
here to introduce us to a new perspective on what it means to be a feminist and how to achieve equality through it. Please welcome Junior Annika Baskin.
When I was in the 4th grade, a boy, completely unprompted, decided to unload upon me his opinion that girls were weak. So I decided to play basketball for 4 years after, just to spite him. Now, I don't play basketball anymore, and I don't think about that experience often. However, its implications have stayed with me for a while. His mindset reflected something larger about society, something that both infuriated me and piqued my curiosity. My first experience with feminism was from a talk that I had at my middle school. It was a quick and relatively meaningless discussion along the lines of, it's a thing of the past, we don't need it anymore, case closed. It was pretty clear that our school didn't find it too important and expected us to skip it over as well. Naturally, the pull towards feminism was instantaneous. From then, I decided that I was going to take whatever opportunity I could to be a part of the movement. I learned from theory, read about local events, and studied poetry. I found the movement incredible. It gave me a space to discuss society, and it was empowering to finally have the opportunity to actively participate in creating change. To me, feminism meant creating a better, more equal world, helping every girl. However, I began to take issue with the mainstream manifestation of the movement, especially in how it affected me and my behavior. The message of the cause began to feel excluding, promoting an ideal unachievable for women of color like me. Society tends to think of feminism as a movement dedicated solely towards advancing women. Its end goal, rather, is equality for all people, irrespective of gender. Its initial 3 waves were focused on equality in education, the workforce, and diversity. 4th wave feminism is a creation of the last 10 years, especially focused on spreading empowerment through technology. I learned about feminism mainly through literature from and about the first 3 waves. Thus, realizing that my contributions to the movement were a part of the 4th wave began to give me pause, especially as I found myself increasingly unable to identify with its majority voice. Eventually, looking with a more critical eye, I began to find some parts of the movement, especially its tenets and central figures, disconcerting. In anthropology, push and pull factors describe reasons why people leave or join communities. For me, there were 2 major pushes that I simply could not ignore. The first was the rise of girl boss feminism. The term was coined by Sophia Amoruso, owner of fast fashion business Nasty Gal. It defines powerful women as those who face the struggles of patriarchy but succeed nonetheless. It encourages women to empower themselves and rise up in the framework of patriarchy, essentially instructing us to fight to survive in the system in which we live. When I first heard about the stories of these women, they seemed incredibly empowering. Despite dealing with so much, they managed to rise in the system in which they lived and now are incredibly successful. I mean, what better example for a feminist icon than someone who managed to survive the patriarchy? Now, I'm not discounting what these women have accomplished. However, many seem to forget that girl bosses often step over others. Amoruso, for instance, puts her workers in unlivable conditions and pays them unlivable wages. Girl boss feminism conflates success with working with the patriarchy. The end result, the exploitation of many is rewarded with the praise of the individual. Now, is it just me that sees an issue with that? The idea of a girl boss makes it seem like achieving social and economic prominence is equally possible for everyone, when in reality, it's far more complex. Women are encouraged to put each other down in favor of becoming more wealthy. Rather than helping to create women create their own place in society by elevating us as a whole, Girl boss feminism encourages us to partake in the unequal standards of patriarchy. If you want to be economically successful, you have to be willing to walk over others. If you want to be socially prominent, you have to be willing to silence others. Girl boss feminism creates the rather dangerous notion that one can achieve anything, no matter what, by working hard enough, no matter what field they work in. This, of course, ignores the multiple societal barriers that unequally affect specific groups. For example, women of color, like me. And that's where my second push factor comes in. I'm Indian, something quite hard to miss about me. I was born and raised in America, probably also pretty easy to tell. As a first-generation Indian American, my identity constantly shifts as I learn more about my culture and how it intersects with the culture that I've been raised in my entire life. I could not understand why I struggled so deeply to reconcile myself with this wave's icons until I learned about the dominance of white feminism in the movement. White feminism creates the idea that feminism is the same irrespective of racial identity, making it seem as if every woman faces the same societal burdens. This, of course, ignores the fact that we live in a world that is not only patriarchal, but racially unequal. White feminism promises women of color that if they simply follow its overarching message and work their hardest, they too will be able to achieve social and economic prominence. And this, equality for women of color is made to look far easier than it actually is. For a period of time, I thought that this promise of simply working my hardest was true. So I tried my hardest to leave my culture behind. I barely learned Tamil and generally avoided anything to do with my roots. At times, this made me deeply insecure. To some, I was a studying machine, apparently incapable of deep thought on my own identity. To others, I was a coconut. My mannerisms and personality were too white for them. So, this all begs the question, if I think feminism is harmful at times, do I still consider myself a feminist? Absolutely. And that is because I have found hope in the promise of change. And I have found this hope by working in intersectional feminism, or feminism that seeks to embrace each person's individual and unique experiences. My own complex identity, a result of my life, my experiences, and everything that makes me uniquely me. By considering myself in totality, I've been able to view myself in a completely different way. Not just a woman, but an Indian woman. And not just an Indian woman, but one who's been raised in an American culture. Recently, I've been working to reconnect to the part of myself that I blocked off. I've been able to rediscover who I am, relearning my entire identity piece by piece. This hasn't been instantaneous. It's been a slow and difficult process. Dancing to Bollywood, wearing Indian clothes more often, relearning Tamil from a beginner level, which is going horribly, by the way. It's slow, and it's tiring, and quite often, I want to give it up. However, I've realized that it's a necessary process. Intersectional feminism has helped me fix the harms to my self-view that white feminism did. I've been able to come back to terms with myself as an Indian person, relearning the parts of my identity that I blocked off. And in doing so, I've been able to see how different parts of my identity intersect, looking at aspects of myself like my race, gender, and class more acutely. I've also been able to see how I can affect the movement, serving as a board member of my school's Intersectional Feminist Club and working to reduce educational inequity with girls in India. In all of this, I've realized that feminism is something to be shaped. It changes with each person, and it has no set definition. And only by factoring in not just my experiences, but everyone's experiences, can a truly helpful and holistic version of the movement be created. This isn't easy by any means, but it's something that has to happen. And it can only happen by all of us realizing that different parts of our identity are not separate. Rather, they compound and complement each other. All of you, as people, have your own identities that are varied from those you meet in ways that are sometimes subtle, sometimes pronounced. However, realizing these differences are key to realizing how you interact with society and vice versa. Only in stepping back and seeing the whole can you truly see yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika, for sharing the significance of a more holistic approach to the feminist movement. As individuals, we each have our own unique experiences that deserve to be recognized, regardless of how they fit in with societal norms. Here to share the significance of focusing on our own journeys rather than following the norm is sophomore Rithika Arora.
As a young girl, I looked up to characters on Disney Channel, trying my best to be like them or incorporate some aspect of their life into my own. I attempted to dress up like Emma Ross, walked around with the songbook just like Allie Dawson, wanted to build tunnels through the walls of my house like Parker Rooney, and looked up to Teddy Duncan for her personality and super cool bedroom. Sometimes these characters' lifestyles were easy to live up to. A quick shopping trip to Justice allowed me to believe that I had the fashion sense of Emma Ross. And a random notebook I found lying around in my house became my new songbook, just like Allie Dawson's. Some aspects, however, were a little less achievable, like building a massive system of tunnels through the walls of my house like Parker Rooney. Nevertheless, even with my occasional failure to meet these crazy standards, the idea of comparing myself to others was ingrained into me. As I grew older, I looked at my friends for an example of what to do. In elementary school, I wanted the same games they had and wanted my sticker collection to be as big as theirs. Again, whether or not I ever achieved these ideals never really had any emotional impact on me, and so the mindset lived on. As my priorities changed, I compared things such as my grades, accomplishments, athletic ability, and mile run times. These comparisons sometimes brought me down, as they weren't always as easy to achieve as finding a notebook and writing lyrics about my life as a 9-year-old. Instead, they required hard work and dedication. I tried my best to meet some of these ideals and often failed, but this mindset really started to take a toll on me when I was diagnosed with leukemia and some of these expectations became impossible to live up to. Let me give you a little backstory. I was diagnosed with leukemia when I was 11 years old and received 2.5 years of chemotherapy. These drugs impaired my ability to do many of the daily activities I was used to doing, ranging from the basic functions, things as easy as going up and down the stairs in my house multiple times a day, or just sitting down and standing back up, let alone my passions, such as attending a dance class or playing a 9-hole round of golf. Midway through my treatment, I started going to physical therapy to rebuild my strength. At times, I felt like a toddler, starting fresh, with limited muscle memory and capability. Although I didn't literally need to relearn how to walk, I could barely walk for 10 minutes without feeling fatigued and with the immediate need of a break. The physical barriers alone were too much to bear for 11-year-old me, but mentally, it was extremely difficult to comprehend my inability to perform the simplest of human functions. I couldn't believe that for all those years, I had taken walking for granted. As a young girl with a limited understanding, I came to the conclusion that I would be back to 100% as soon as my treatment ended, but that wasn't exactly the case. My treatment came to an end around 2.5 years ago, but some of the side effects, mainly my lack of strength, have lasted. Over the years, I have worked to regain strength and get back to my energy levels pre-treatment. The way I think of it, I unlock a new level in a game every time I move beyond my comfort zone. Once I move on to the next level, a new range of various activities opens up to me, and I no longer consider them physically straining. A couple months after my treatment ended, I attended a dance convention. I had rejoined dance classes prior to my treatment ending, but would only do a couple hours throughout the entire week. In this convention, I did 6 hours in a row for 2 days, which, is probably a reasonable expectation from a healthy child, but for me, it was a big deal. By the end of the weekend, I could barely feel my legs, but I also knew that I had just unlocked a new level. I had pushed myself enough to go past my current strength, and after this big push, it would become easier and easier to do things requiring similar amounts of energy. Still, I sometimes face a boundary where I get to a point where I feel like I can't cross. It's the feeling of being stuck at one level of a game, with the same rules as all the others and a slight increase in difficulty. For whatever reason, this level is extra challenging and feels impossible to cross, but you keep trying, even though you may start to lose motivation along the way. Then finally, you end up passing, and it all of a sudden seems so easy. You wonder how there was ever a time where you couldn't do the same activities in your sleep. That's exactly how I feel when pushing my limits. Certain levels are pretty easy to cross, yet others take a little longer. So backstory aside, because of my experiences, I'm no longer able to do some of the things as my peers can on a physical level. Yet, the supposedly harmless mindset I had developed as a young girl had lived on, and you can probably see how that might have become a problem. Just a couple months ago, in my second season of the JV school golf team, I was able to walk the 9 holes of various golf courses for matches, but the weight room sessions were where my weaknesses started to impact me. At these sessions, we were asked to do multiple exercises, and if we did a couple reps correctly, the coach would allow us to add more weights or increase the difficulty in some other way. Over the weeks, all my teammates were able to reach higher and higher levels, yet I was stuck at the same level, barely able to do the simplest versions of some of the exercises. I disregarded the fact that I had received 2.5 years of chemotherapy and that my body was at a different place, while the rest of my teammates had been growing up as healthy kids without the same setbacks. The fact that I couldn't do everything my teammates were able to was enough to put me down and bring back my comparison mindset. But this time, I wasn't comparing myself to the characters on TV and fulfilling these ideals through a shopping trip with some new clothes or packs of stickers. My hard work and dedication would only take me so far as to slowly improve, yet the results would take a while. This time, it was physically impossible for me to meet the same standards as my peers. It was discouraging to see that I was no longer capable of fulfilling my comparison mindset. Because this mindset would bring me down, I tried to push myself away from the unreasonable standards I had put upon myself since I was younger, looking at someone else for what I expected from myself. The new mindset I have worked on adapting also involves a comparison, but instead of using someone else, I use myself. How I was before versus how I am now. Going back to the same story, I thought back to how I was. At one point in time, my legs would shake, trying to do the simplest exercises like a squat or a lunge. In these weight room sessions, I was doing almost complete proper squats with added weights or increased reps. So for me, it was a step up, a new level unlocked in my game. One fact that I have to accept is that I won't always be able to do everything physically that my peers can. To make up for it, I have to alter my mindset and some of my practices. We tend to look at those around ourselves to set a standard for where we should be at in our own lives, yet everyone would feel quite a lot more fulfilled if they created their own personal benchmarks. The idea of normal, a societal construct, may persuade you to adhere to a universal path with set objectives. Yet this path takes no consideration to what you've been through. Yeah, it was normal for most kids my age to be able to do the exercises we were told. But given my circumstances, this was an unreasonable expectation for me. Chances are, no one around you has been through exactly what you have, whether it was an injury, traumatic experience, mental illness, or anything else. So if your experiences, the things that shape your life and affect your priorities, aren't shared, is it really fair to hold yourself accountable to the same standards? Probably not. If we actually took time to curate aims for ourselves, we'd realize that 90% of the time, our goals would be different from what we've seen one of our classmates do or something we've seen on TV. This means that reaching the normal isn't always doable or even worth it. For me, I use my leukemia and its impacts on my health to set goals, which for the most part are different from those around me. And unlike my example of a physical setback, your experience can be something mental, social, emotional, or a spiritual event that has impacted you. Each of these and more is reason enough to look apart from the norm. And most importantly, remember to celebrate every little milestone as well as the big victories. At the end of the day, although I don't have the same style as Emma Ross, perfect grades like some of my peers, or reach what is considered the norm, I'd say I'm right where I want to be. So yeah, there's my big revelation. Setting personal benchmarks instead of using universal standards. Living in the era of unfulfilled New Year's resolutions, let's make it our mission to stick to this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Rithika, for sharing your amazing story of healing and growth with us. It is incredibly important to celebrate each achievement as a marker of our strength and hard work. But often, especially as high school students, the pressure of a final result may overshadow the many efforts that we make along the way. Our next speaker will share how he began to embrace the journey in all of its imperfections and unexpected outcomes. It is my pleasure to introduce Senior Louis Chevet.
Crafting the perfect Spotify queue is a difficult, time-consuming task. Drawing from countless different playlists, storing anything from Amy Winehouse to Kanye West, I craft a temporary list of anywhere from 20 to 100 songs for the next day. I could probably tell you a day of the week or time of day just by looking over one of these playlists. If it's indie or pop, it's Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. If it's R&B or soul, then it's probably Tuesday or Thursday. And if it's rap, then it's most likely Saturday or Sunday. Mellow songs mean it's the morning and I need something to wake up my brain. Something more upbeat and fast-paced means it's the afternoon. And I'm on my way home to relax or to hang out with friends. Saying everything aloud does make the whole process feel just a bit obsessive, but it gives me some sense of control over the next day. My chosen Spotify cues allow me to personally create and carve out the quote-unquote perfect day. I can tell myself that it'll take 6 mellow songs for me to get to school, and by the time I arrive, I'll be refreshed and mostly awake. 5 songs for me to finish an econ project during study hall, and 10 songs for me to get to downtown Mountain View after school to hang out with friends and get home. Unfortunately, the world around me wasn't my own personal radio. The fulfillment I got from listening to music became dependent on whether this illusion of control could hold up, whether I could get to school without hitting traffic, whether I could actually work during study hall without getting distracted, and whether parking in Castro wouldn't be full. My meticulous music schedules reflected my desire to chase perfection, what I thought should happen. Fulfilling expectations dictated my life, and listening to music, one of my cherished hobbies, only scratched the surface. From very early on in my life, the idea of perfection always came in a package with obsessing over details. From very early on in my life, the idea of perfection always came in a package with obsessing over details. And one of my dad's favorite sayings is, if you're gonna do something, do it right. And this applied to anything and everything to me as a kid. From weeding a garden to doing extra math homework, nothing was done without some sort of goal that had to be met. And poring over the details was the only way to ensure that. High school provided countless opportunities for me to set and fulfill goals with even bigger implications than before. Gone were the days of being rewarded with a new video game. Things like college and scholarship money were at stake. My day was chock full of controlling every single little detail and outcome. In the classroom, everything I did was for an A to hopefully pop up on that semester grade report. And as a water polo player, everything I did was for our team to get another win. But with each success, the fulfillment I felt was temporary, whereas with each failure, the emptiness felt more lasting. A good grade on a test would validate my preparation process, but a bad one would make me question my worth as a person. While this goal-oriented approach allowed me to be the best student or best water polo player I could be, I felt like there was still something missing with me being the best version of myself in general. It felt like my own self-worth was determined by someone or something else. My self-worth lost that first component, the sense of self. In order to actualize my potential as a person, I couldn't point to beating someone else or a hard number. It was a competition with myself. This sense of competition was fueled by concrete achievements, the grades, wins, and results. But what if I couldn't measure myself with a scoreboard or report card? What if there was no opposing team, just players in a pool? Instead of comparing myself to others, I compared me to me. It sounds confusing, but my past and future selves became a way for me to see growth. It became clearer and clearer that doing something right applied less to shaping results and more to the steps along the way. Turning my focus inward meant caring about what I could control. So while I couldn't guarantee that my childhood garden would be free of weeds every single minute of the day, I could guarantee that I would scour every corner and fully root each one out. When I embrace the uncertainty of imperfection, I can focus on applying all possible energy to the certainty of the process. As a kid, writing was always one of my passions, but as a high school student, essay writing became an exercise in control. It was always about following the formula for an A, and the joy I got from it became dependent on that one little letter, not from actually writing. I used to English assignments full of busy work, tinkering with synonyms for half an hour. But when I cut off the external noise to enjoy literature in full, I could savor it. From my English class last year, I still remember every part of Percy Shelley's poem Ozymandias coming to life. The sweeping sands, crumbling statue, and ironic proclamation. Shifting my focus from the results to the details, I could tap into my childlike love of reading and writing, even when doing a school assignment. My appreciation of the text made my writing more fluid and sophisticated. I focused on building my main ideas from a place of passion. I found that most of the time, the results eventually followed. My ideas became clear, and they weren't contrived for the sake of a grade. And once I got that down, I was able to care about the details apart from the ones in my essays. Instead of asking the what questions, what song should I cue for me to have the best morning possible, I started asking the how and why questions. How can I still make the most out of my day when things don't go according to plan? Why do I respond to something a certain way? And these questions help shape my interactions with others. Take teaching coding classes, for example. My relationships with my students weren't just about helping them get to the correct answer. They're about understanding their motivations and ideas. I just listened and processed what they said. Looking at the steps of their thought processes, asking why they chose to address this specific piece of code, or how they tackled a specific error, is now how I approach all conversations. Now, this seems a little counterintuitive in a computer science context when error codes literally flash across the screen and programs won't run without perfection, but error codes only mean the process has just begun. I've redefined perfection to mean striving for full understanding rather than something flawless. Not only as a teacher, but also as a journalist, friend, and son, my relationships are more fulfilling when I'm able to listen without fixating on what could be better. While we can't always control the destination, we can control how much we get out of our respective journeys. We shouldn't let not getting a job, grade, or result we were hoping for invalidate all the time and effort we put into everything leading up to it, because lasting fulfillment comes from truly appreciating every single one of those steps. When we focus on the process, the desired results will eventually follow, even if they may not be what we originally planned. So, I now look to start my day with just hitting shuffle on a playlist, and the day could be perfect in its own way. Thank you.
Thank you, Louie, for reminding us that obsessing over the little details is not always productive, but we should rather focus on and enjoy the journey. Sometimes life pulls us in so many directions, but we should focus and center ourselves on what matters most.
We will now have another 10-minute break, during which you can talk with speakers and write notes to them in the lobby. Please join us for the third block of the evening afterwards for junior Nitish Gorosheti, sophomore Marissa Lewitson, senior Amulia Aditham, and senior Jad Salahie's talks.
Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all again, and I hope you've been enjoying the program so far. One of the beautiful things we get to experience as American citizens is the promise of being embraced in a community of various cultures, languages, and customs, no matter if you are the first of your family to grow up in the States or the 10th. In navigating a modern world backed by historical difficulties, this goal of sustaining your own cultural experience takes a mentality of balancing your own identity with other influences in your life. Here to explain the nuances of maintaining his own culture while being a first-generation Indian American and all of its importance, beauty, and challenge, please welcome to the stage Junior Nitish Gorshati.
Ninu chebutunanu nake teliyadu. Could you understand what I was saying? Well, to be honest, neither could I. That's Telugu, the language of my family from India. Ever since I was younger, I've always felt a sort of disconnect from my background. Heck, I went to a Chinese monastery, learning Mandarin before I even heard about my mother tongue. Ever since I was younger, I've also felt this disconnect from my background because I could never fit in with the other Asian kids, and I was Indian. This feeling of outsiderness was exemplified when I went to India for the first time. Between visiting every 10 or so years and the environment not being what I was used to, I felt different. I did not know if this was a good different or a bad different until I met my extended family. Seeing everyone just communicate and laugh with each other made me feel isolated and jealous. I just felt this detachment from everyone around me. I always thought of myself as part of my Indian family, but now I didn't know if I was. Looking back, nothing seemed missing from my ethnic upbringing. I would go to religious temples. I would even be able to recite a couple lines from popular Telugu movies like Bahubali or other Telugu cinema. But there was something missing. I would still only know the bare minimum as a child because I would always choose to do things the American way. Why would I ever need to talk about the little Krishna in school when Geronimo Stilton was what was popping off? So, I only knew the bare minimum, but I wonder why I never had my culture pushed on me more. When I asked my parents about how they were raised, they brought up this high-stakes testing culture of India, where opportunity was like a game of politics, filled with constant backstabbing, greed, and adversaries. And they had to stay on their A game 24 hours, 7 days a week. I was raised to perform like this in school, even if I would rather spend my time doing something else, like playing with my best friend, the iPad. The contrast between my life and that of my parents is evident. While I stayed up trying to figure out how to beat level 8 of Super Mario Bros., they would be studying for an exam that would decide the rest of their lives. I was basically playing video games while they were shipped to boarding school. Quite the contrast. They never see America the way I see it. They still believed in this high-stakes education system that they grew up in. And I can't really blame them for that. If I had a nickel for every time they flexed their class or state placements on me while I was playing video games, I would be able to retire early and a millionaire. Though, jokes aside though, to put it into perspective, life was different in India. It was difficult if you never worked hard enough. So, while I see America as my home, they still see it as this land of opportunity, where success is only given to those who work 10 times harder than others. And success can mean different things to different people. To some, it could mean material wealth, others, fame, others, respect. But for me, success just means acceptance and belonging. But for my parents, the idea was more simple than that. Life just has to be better than what it was. And this ambition of theirs meant that outperforming everyone while ignoring all distractions was what was expected of me. So, while this isn't the intention of making me a bright student with a well-set future, it made me resentful towards my roots and pushed me towards the American way, one where I felt like I could breathe. America has a lot of immigrants from so many parts of the world, so you'd think it'd be culturally accepting, acknowledging diversity when it's due. Wrong. It places a really high demand on assimilation. You can think of assimilation like a melting pot, where the minority culture tries to rapidly blend into the dominant one. And you can think of multiculturalism, what America is more perceived as a salad bowl, where all pieces of culture can retain their basic identity while all still being together. And this idea of a salad bowl seems really cool. However, it's never accomplished because of just how easy it is to feel this pressure to assimilate. Let me put this idea into perspective. Let me throw out the term whitewashed. Have you ever heard it? It's a term in school that has always been used as an insult. For example, someone gets a pair of Air Force Ones, and blink of an instant, they're known as whitewashed. Now, I'm not saying this is always the case, just an example. But to put it into perspective, a simple act like buying a pair of shoes can make someone feel alienated and isolated from their group. This constant pressure of public trying to put me under a stereotype, if I can't uphold to that standard, it really puts shame to me. So this pressure mixed in with my family's pressure and this immigrant mentality kind of puts me in the middle of two sides. It's a game of tug of war where no side wins. So, on one side of the coin, I run the route of whitewashing, where I'm blending into American society. And on the other side of the coin, I run the route of cultural stereotyping. What do you think of when you think of an American family? Probably something out of a Disney movie. White picket fence, dog, football going in the background, a normal white family. And what do you think of when you think of an Indian family? Probably someone smart and nerdy, like how we're portrayed in Disney movies, like Baljeet from Phineas and Ferb, or Ravi from Jessie. And these are a bunch of examples of stereotypes. But as an Indian, I don't see myself falling into any of these. It's like I'm battling between two different cultures that are so very different, and I can't really choose one. Because of this fork in the road I'm constantly at, I feel disjointed in my daily life. The most obvious is my inability to speak my own language of Telugu properly. I only knew stuff from Telugu from movies and reading subtitles on them. I can basically tell you or guess what the plot of the movie is and just hope I know what I'm saying. And this obvious incapacity has been recently exhibited by my interactions with my grandparents. Yes, you're thinking right. I can't talk to my grandparents properly. I can't hold a single conversation with them without just being like, "Hi, how are you? Okay, bye." It's rough. But the saddest thing about this is it's not just me facing this problem. It's a whole group of first-generation Americans that are facing the similar pressure as me. Even if the people I talked to at school were primarily Indian, no one ever talks about their culture. We always talk about the latest Spider-Man No Way Home instead of the newest Mahesh Babu movie. And most importantly, a lot of us don't even know about our mother tongues, just like me. We're all under this mindset of trying to succeed that we lose out on an important piece of what defines us. We're blending in with two-way pressure from home and the public that we just can't communicate our differences. And if we can't communicate these differences with the older generation, this newer one will never be able to achieve their dreams. So, while I'm still finding out who I am as a first-generation American, I know the importance of culture, and I'm figuring out who I am. Our generation is becoming a salad bowl, where our opinions are being drenched in the dressings of our parents' experiences. And diversity, which should be the most important ingredient, isn't even being added. So, let's choose our own path and dive straight down the middle. And we should never be bound by any mentality. Let's let our culture shape us authentically and define us. Even through a barrier, I'm never shut off completely from my culture, and now I never will be. There's so much value through listening to ancient tales, through a translation, or just anything else. It is worth it to know about your culture. Without it, we lose out on a set of unique perspectives and identities, and most importantly, a piece of who we are in America. So, let's make a salad bowl America, where we never lose the pieces of our culture that makes us, us. Thank you.
Now, celebrating our collective diversity within generational and cultural differences is as important now as ever. And I thank you, Nitish, for sharing your story to help us embrace inclusivity. But in the pursuit of our identities, however, we're often challenged by past experiences or uncertainty for the future. To share her story on the importance of living lives of possibility, please welcome our next speaker, sophomore Marissa Lewitson.
In the movie The Matrix, we see the representation of the red pill and blue pill. Reality and fear versus lying and comfort. Keanu Reeves' character is given the option to take either the red pill, face reality, or the blue pill, stay in the known. He makes the daring decision and takes that red pill. Constantly, throughout the duration of the movie, he thinks to himself, what if he hadn't taken that pill? But then he slowly learns to be happy with his decisions. I took my red pill, and I learned how to be happy with the things in my life. Now, when I say I took my red pill, I mean that I used to care about what people thought about me, about whether or not I fit someone's social standards, and whether or not I looked like someone else. Constantly, thoughts like these were running through my head, and I was living in my own form of the Matrix. Not one where crazy robot viruses attack people, and I have inhumane powers to stop them, but a matrix of caring how people saw me. That was my blue pill. And after an enormous amount of time, I took my red pill, the pill that helped me break the cycles of what ifs I had grown into. I had cared so much of what people thought about me that I had stopped my whole life. I wasn't living, I was simply just trying to fit in. At my middle school, we were in a class of about 29 people, and of those 29 people, I feel like the only one every day thinking to myself, what if I didn't go to school today? What if they didn't notice I showed up? And what if they say something about me again? I feared that people wouldn't like me if I didn't meet their standards. And every day was the same repeating thought process, just like this. And there was never one positive thought. And I was stuck, trapped, encased in my own box of fear. My only thoughts were the ones that started with, what if? The things people had said about me ended up affecting my everyday life. In fact, I couldn't do a simple task such as shopping for fear of being judged on how I looked. And now I look back, I no longer care of what any of those people think about me. They had broken down my confidence so much that I couldn't fit my own standard, the standard of simply liking who I was. And I look back and I think to myself, I no longer care about what any of those people think about me. My whole thought process has shifted. I was able to slowly construct the person I am today by being able to start those scared what-if sentences in a new, light-minded way. I realized that there will always be people who have something to say about me, but I'm the one who has to keep on moving. And now look at me, standing here, loving where I am. It took me a long time to finally like the person I am, but I remember last year I had walked into a Barnes & Noble's with one of my close friends in hopes to find a new read. We hopped on that escalator and headed up and searched for a place to sit and relax. And as we sat down next to one of the enormous bookshelves, I turned to my right, and I saw this little lettering scribbled onto the side of the shelf that read, "We were made to be perfectly imperfect." And this simple sentence had hit me straight in the heart as if Cupid shot at himself. It made me realize that, yes, I was not meant to be like everyone else, and I was meant to be different. That the things people had pointed out about me were not imperfections, they were who made me me. I found myself. I no longer judge myself based on others' opinions, and I no longer need validation from others, because I'm finally meeting my standard rather than theirs. I finally like the person I am. And I noticed, after this whole process of self-growth, that the only thing stopping me was fear. Fear is one of the largest forces in our everyday lives. It keeps us in the known cycle of life that we're used to, and we're anchored down by past negative experiences that we think the future will repeat the past. We fear the future, and the two simple words of, what if, are the biggest commanders when we look into it. Every day, people all around you are thinking these words, and I know for a fact, every single person in this audience has started off a sentence with, what if? We fear the possibilities of things that could happen, but fearing the what if, the unknown, does not always have to be this way, because there's a difference between living in fear and living with fear. When we think, what if something goes wrong? There's always the alternate option of, what if something went right? We spend time thinking about the decisions we're gonna make and contemplating all the possible outcomes. The problem with this? You'll never know the true outcomes of the future. You won't know if something is right or wrong, and you won't know if the decision you make is ever the right choice. And repeating over and over and over again, we think about all the possible results. We overthink about how things will go wrong and never take a second to think about, what if this went in the right direction? Fear is the one thing we can think of when we look into the future. And in all honesty, I think fear is the only thing stopping any of us from achieving our true dreams. So next time you're scared to go out of your comfort zone, just think about how the only thing stopping you is this little 4-letter word: fear. Don't let this minute word take over your everyday life, and respond to those scared what-if thoughts with the ones that say, what if I gave this a try? What if I take things slowly before jumping in? And what if I really can do it? Earlier I had mentioned I had broken my cycle, the cycle of fearing the possible outcomes of what people thought about me. And don't get me wrong, I still to this day think sometimes, what if somebody doesn't like me, and what if I don't look like someone else? But I've come to realize that that is normal. It is not normal when it controls your everyday life, and thinking on a 24/7 basis, what if this and what if that, is not healthy. You can't change the past, but you can create the future. You can create all the possible outcomes that can happen in your life, but none of your dreams will come true if you don't go out and do it. Choose the what if thoughts that say, what if I can do it? You can start using past fears to realize how far you've come. Use it as a way to prove yourself wrong, and use it as a way to show others they were wrong. A way to find out who you are and where you can challenge yourself, and a way to see and show those past negative experiences that they won't and cannot affect you anymore. You may never know the true outcomes of the future, but you can mold it. That's what if. Those realities that you make up in your mind that can lead you to create and maybe experience something new. And thinking about, what if this happened instead of what actually did? And that's okay. It's okay to think about the things that could have happened, because what ifs are just a starting factor in the bigger picture. The past is only in your head, the future is in your hands, but you'll never know the true outcome to things. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa, for that insightful look into the countless what-ifs in our lives. Our next speaker is an individual and good friend of mine who I've had the privilege of working with. Mental health is a topic that has gained more awareness and understanding in recent years. However, there are still misconceptions, and there's still much that we can learn. Here to explain the fundamental difference between resilience and willpower, and to be vulnerable in her own experience with mental illness, is Senior Amulya Aditham.
I can't run anymore. I've sped from the bathroom, down the stairs, through the dining room, and into the kitchen. There's no way out, and I am faced with inevitable doom. Now, I don't want to brag, but I'm pretty smart for a 4-year-old, so instead of running away, I decide to defend myself. Top, bottom, right, and left. I interlock my kitchen drawers to create a barrier that protects me from my enemy. Bath time. My mom runs into the kitchen, soap in hand, and just stops. My absolute, just pure intelligence as a 4-year-old puzzles her. She tries to undo my 4 of kitchen drawers, but just as quickly as she does, I build it back up. I've won. My kitchen drawer fort stuck with me the entire time I lived in my childhood home. Not only did I discover it was the quickest way to unload the dishwasher, but it also provided me with an emotional sanctuary. I needed that because as a kid, crying had always made me feel weak. When I was, I hid so I could be at peace. But you see, I'm also an attention lover, so I needed to be in the center of everything. I could never be fully isolated. At my house, that meant the kitchen and the safety of my drawers. Completely covered, yet still in the middle of the house, I could cry, alone, but still seen. Fast forward some years into the future, it's Thanksgiving break of my junior year, and I have realized that isolation is not something I can always avoid. It's pitch black outside, and this pool is freezing. Am I all alone at a huge pool at 11 p.m.? Yeah, but my parents told me to make use of every free resource I have, and that includes the pool at this hotel. Immigrant mentality. I'm 16 now, and the past few months have been difficult, to say the least. I'm just lost. I'm filled with this deep, dark sadness, constant anxiety, countless panic attacks filled with hyperventilating, crying, and pacing around. My grades drop, I'm barely getting out of bed, and I'm alternating from getting either 16 hours of sleep to 3. I'm void of motivation and just full of despair. I know, sounds healthy, right? So as I sit in this pool, I decide that this is the moment I'm gonna change my life. I just need to work on myself. I decide to push past all negative feelings, force my happiness. Maybe if I just push myself, the depression and anxiety will simply stop? Yeah, that mindset couldn't have been further from the truth. The weeks after I sat in that pool, I tried my hardest to get out of bed and be productive, and it didn't work. I got up at 7, focused on my online classes, turned in all my homework on time, but I was still sad. If working my hardest to get better didn't work, was I ever going to be okay? I felt like a failure. I felt like I was incapable. It's a few months into the future, and I'm working on an English essay that's a pretty decent chunk of my grade. And of course, I left it to the last day to actually, sit down and write the thing. But despite several panic attacks, I got through it. I pushed myself to put out an essay that I could be satisfied with. I used my willpower as I promised myself in that pool. So why didn't I feel better? Shouldn't I feel relieved? Relief was honestly something that I hadn't felt in a while. No matter how much I accomplished or how hard I worked, I just didn't feel good. And even though I was seeking professional help, my therapist and I knew I needed something more. Sertraline, escitalopram, gabapentin, quetiapine, propranolol. I spent 8 months with my psychiatrist trying to find the right medication and diagnosis that worked for me, to no avail. When it comes to mental health, a diagnosis can be relieving. It gives you a better understanding of what's wrong and sets you on the right path for treatment. Now, thankfully, I'm very lucky to have a very involved family. Once my aunt found out that I wasn't feeling too hot, she decided to refer me to her friend, a neuropsychiatrist. And after a 4-hour-long conversation, I finally got my diagnosis: bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is a lifelong cyclical mood disorder in which people alternate from depressive lows to manic highs. No one really knows what causes it, but it's thought to be a combination of genetics, chemistry, brain structure, and environment. Not an easy diagnosis to be stuck with, right? Now, the first thing I thought of when I heard bipolar disorder was Kanye West. His cyclical ups and downs may have provided us with some of the most genius music of this generation. I mean, who else could get millions of people to stream a song that rhymes poop with scoop for a minute straight? Now, despite Kanye's intellect and creativity, I was trying to emulate his genius, not the bipolar. But the realization that this was something I was going to deal with for the rest of my life motivated me to work with the difficulty of depression and mania, rather than let it swallow me whole like the weeks following the pool incident. Now, what I failed to realize that moment in the pool and after my essay is that willpower is never enough. Just like a physical injury requires time and healing and support, so does working through mental illness. You can't just force yourself out of a chemical imbalance or a mood disorder. It takes an understanding of your feelings. Now, what you can rely on to get better is being vulnerable with the people you trust. It's difficult, but it truly means having a community that supports you, helps you when you're feeling down. For me, telling my parents that I was depressed was arguably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. They worked so hard to move to a new country, to set up a good life for me. And it was heartbreaking to tell them that I didn't want it anymore. I felt ungrateful. But it also opened me up to the support that actually helped me get better. By being vulnerable and sharing my feelings, I was able to work towards a happier life and better mental state. Opening up also introduced me to the people who clarified the difference between willpower and resilience. Now, there's a clear difference between the two. Willpower is trying to push past how you're feeling in order to achieve what you want in the short run. In doing so, you're ignoring the gravity of your emotions. Your emotions matter. It is so important to be at peace with them in order to feel happy and healthy. Now, willpower is obsolete, but resilience isn't. Resilience is understanding yourself, taking breaks when you need to, listening to your limits, opening yourself up to a community that supports you, and bouncing back when you feel prepared. It's using the support of those around you to bear the weight on your shoulders. Getting better and feeling healthier isn't simply a matter of just pushing yourself. It's understanding your feelings through time and people that you trust. Although I may be bipolar, it doesn't define me. Through hard work and tough times, I've realized that a one-track mind focused on simply getting over it isn't going to work. I better understand how to prioritize myself and my mental health in order to stay happy and healthy. And although I may be bipolar, I'm also resilient. That's the key to getting better. Thank you.
Thank you, Amulia, for so vulnerably sharing your journey with mental health. Mental health and the experiences that accompany it greatly influence our identity. I've loved getting to know this next speaker as he has been vulnerable in sharing his story and his navigating his contrasting background. Here to share his journey finding his identity by developing moral principles, please welcome our next speaker of the night, Jad Salahiyeh.
Mornings used to be my favorite. Waking up to Arab classics blasting on a speaker and my mom clapping along to the beat made me feel very connected to my culture. But what I liked even better was the smell of freshly baked pita bread making its way to my room. I'm a first-generation immigrant of two parents from Syria. Wars and invasions on their native country forced them to flee to various places throughout their upbringing. Because of this, they always valued a broad worldview and the ability to adapt well to change. That's why they sent me and my siblings to a private French immersion school in Palo Alto through junior high. At school, conversations were centered around Colin Kaepernick. There was no longer Arabic music in the background, just like any other school in the Bay Area at the time. As much as these experiences helped me form a broad worldview, I was rather confused. It's hard enough finding your identity as a teenager. Living amidst three different cultures made me feel like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. Not knowing where I belonged made me feel lost. On top of that, all the people I looked up to came from completely different cultures. I remember asking my mom one time if she knew anyone who was a famous Arab. She had to think for a minute before telling me Shakir was half Lebanese. As an 8-year-old boy who liked soccer, Shakir was not the answer I was hoping for. At all. At the time, I felt like I wasn't represented in the sports or entertainment industries. Apart from Aladdin, there was really no one to look up to. And no matter how hard I tried, I never could get my hands on a flying carpet or a monkey. I felt the pressure of having to choose one culture, conforming, and leaving all the other ones behind. I remember times where I didn't want to be seen as an outsider. So at summer camps, when we all had to say our last names, I would just change mine to Brown. It was easier that way. But looking back, I'm glad to say the Jad Brown phase of my life is over. And now, when people ask me my last name, I say it with my chest. It wasn't until high school that I got to that point, and I started spending more time developing my morals and ideas about society. I started spending time researching, and I began reading about influential leaders such as Tupac Shakur, Nipsey Hussle, and Malcolm X. My mother also told me stories about my grandfather, Abdurrahman Munif, and his support of human rights through his novels. Both of my grandpas always valued their morals over anything, and choosing principle over their safety and comfort was never even a question. Seeing how these men stood on principle helped me realize the man I wanted to be. It was a tough journey, and it didn't come overnight. I started spending time making new friends, many of whom were Polynesian. As I got to know them, I was introduced to their culture. We shared customs, shared food from each of our different cultures with each other. And we got really close. But most importantly, we started spending time discussing real issues and how we can uplift our community. When conflict arose in the Arab world, I was really grateful that my new friends attended demonstrations as if it was their own cause. When a tsunami hit Tonga, it was natural for us to help support the Tongan community by sending resources as well. Because of our shared principles, I was introduced to a whole new culture, and in return, introduced my new friends to mine. And I learned that a friendship based on the same values is much more powerful than one based on solely culture. Over time, I realized I had less interest in the superficial, one-dimensional culture I was trying so hard to fit into. And I wanted to have a real meaningful impact on society based on my unique experiences and fundamental principles. That's when I stopped trying to emulate celebrities that never fully represented me and started thinking deeper than just surface level. Before high school, I always loved music, but I never pushed myself to pursue it. With my new friends, with the same aspirations of writing songs, we pushed ourselves to rap and film music videos. And at first, we were terrible. But just like anything, success takes hard work. But to improve, I had to push myself out of my comfort zone. And for me, this meant trying different instrumentals and even trying to rap in Arabic and French. Now, I'm further than I ever thought I could be in music. And being underrepresented and growing up around many cultures were the same experiences that helped me grow the most as a person and musician. Now, I've written over 1,000 verses and spent hours on music I never released. I recorded professional studios, and I'm often 10 years younger than everyone else in the room. This taught me that my identity has nothing to do with the barriers that hold me back, but instead with how I break them. Because of my ongoing efforts to find out more about my identity, I gained a higher level of self-awareness. So now every challenge I encounter is often a guide for me of what I should attack next. Today, I know who I am. And every day as I take the steps that push me to where I want to be, and not letting aspects of societal norms define my future. These days, I talk less, read more, and listen more, all to overcome outside distractions that might hold me back. One's identity is how one chooses to make decisions. And as long as you stay true to your core values, you can do anything you set your mind to. Real fulfillment doesn't come from trying to fit in, but standing on the principles that you hold above all. Next time you run into a barrier, instead of shying the other way. I challenge you to run at it head on and attack it. With this mentality, all the weaknesses that ever held you back turn into your strengths. Barriers don't break themselves. You break them. So when in search of happiness, remember, don't chase a moment. Stand on principle and chase a life pursuit. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight, Jad. I know that I will be making conscious efforts to expand my worldview and approaching relationships with a new perspective based on my values. We will now have a final 10-minute break. Speakers from this block will be available to talk to in the lobby and are eager to discuss their ideas and more with you. Please join us after for seniors Leah Vagnotti and Sean Tabayoyong and sophomore Olivia Vinkier. Thank you.
Welcome back from our last little break, everyone. We have just 3 speakers remaining, so thank you for sticking with us. Our next talk focuses on the inescapability of loss and its progeny grief. Here to highlight this painfully nonlinear and oftentimes lonely process is our next speaker. I am honored to introduce to you this evening Senior Leo Vignati.
Ever since we moved from Los Angeles, my dad's favorite store has been Aviator Nation. It's something of a clothing company that sells vibrant clothing with simple designs. I never fully understood his appeal to it, but on my dad's birthday in 2020, I decided that I wanted to go to Aviator Nation's San Francisco location to buy him a sweatshirt. When my friend and I parked in the city, we got out of the car and realized there was a parking meter. I checked to see if there was any time left on the meter, but we'd gotten unlucky. I turned back around and saw my friend searching through all of the crevices, trying to find some coins for the meter. But after 10 minutes, we were left with 2 pennies and a dime, so I walked back over to the meter to check for Apple Pay. To my astonishment, the meter that had just had no time left had magically been granted 2 hours. I looked around to see if there was anybody who could have come by and secretly helped us out, but we were completely alone. Now, at this point, you may be asking yourself, why am I telling you this story? A lot of us have weird, almost magical experiences like this, but the reason I tell you this story is because of how much my mom, who passed away in November of my sophomore year from stage 4 sarcoma, would have found it funny. I mean, imagine my friend and I frantically scrambling around Hayes Street in San Francisco in search of a quarter, only to be instantaneously relieved by a miracle. As weird as it sounds, in that moment, I felt her with me. After my mom passed, so many people told me that it was okay to feel however I felt. The only thing is, I didn't know how to process my own emotions. I knew that I would have to work through this, but how? It's not really like there's any guidebook. I'm a senior now, but my story starts all the way back in my sophomore year. After my mom passed, I spent all of my energy trying to ignore my feelings. I distracted myself with soccer and school to not allow myself any time to process. But as most teenagers learn, your feelings will catch back up to you. Over a span of 2 months, I lost all motivation to do schoolwork, put effort into my relationships, and even pursue hobbies such as music production and soccer. I decided to see a therapist, and it wasn't until I sought out this professional help that I realized that the lack of motivation that I had been experiencing was grief. He explained to me how the 1.5 to 2 year time frame was generally when those long-term effects began to settle in, and how my attempts to push away those emotions from the start only amplified these effects on me now. Now that I realized that what I had been experiencing was grief, my mind went to what I've been told about grief. When we think about grief, we think about a process with 5 stages. The Kubler-Ross cycle details these 5 stages as denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The first stage, denial, is a stage I struggle with particularly. Denial is the stage where you deal with the shock factor of your loss. In my case, I had to become acclimated with not seeing my mom around the house anymore. After my mom passed, I returned to school, and my routine stayed somewhat similar. However, when I'd return home from school, I often found myself looking around the house for my mom in the places that she would always be in. My mom often acted as a peacemaker between any disagreements in our house, and after she passed, I assumed that role. Now, taking on her responsibilities helped lessen the effects of her absence. Well, at least partly. Now, some things you can pray for, but it's because you're okay with it turning out whichever way it does. But with something as difficult as losing your mom, it's really hard to be okay with it if it doesn't turn out the way that you prayed it would. I am a very laid-back person, but this genuinely angered me so much that it clouded my hope. I felt like my family and I had prayed so much, only for our prayers to be left unanswered. I began to question my faith, and I even became angry with God. Now, overall, my emotions were very unpredictable. My happiness would come in waves, with some days feeling like I was at the peak with joy, and other days feeling like I was drowning at the bottom of the ocean. In junior year, I struggled with my biggest bout of depression, which, at the time, I hadn't known was grief-induced. These emotional waves came on somewhat of a monthly basis, but otherwise didn't really exemplify any specific pattern. Even within a day, my emotions could change from morning to night. The acceptance stage is taught as the last stage, and reflecting on how at the beginning, all I did was bottle up my emotions and grief, as I grow to live in the acceptance phase every day, I've learned how important it is to not bottle it up. As I lived through these stages, I came to understand that they are portrayed in this assigned order, but there's nothing really definable about any of these stages. They all blend together, like when you're a kid at an ice cream shop and you get 5 different flavors and they mix together into one big gooey mess. Now, just like melted ice cream, your journey with grief may be a difficult, sticky one. And you may even still find remnants of it even after you think you've cleaned up the entire mess. The stages of grief mix together, go out of order, and revert so much. As individuals on unique paths, it is impossible for grief to be in concrete stages. I do believe that the stages give you a decent expectation of how you will feel, but this idea that they are in a fixed order is misleading. Grief is a personal journey, and what you will experience is unique to you. In my case, I never underwent a bargaining stage. This could be due to my age, my mental stability, or my own experiences. There are far too many variables to pinpoint a concrete timeline. Someone may enter a depressive episode before experiencing denial, or even experience both stages at the same time. And although this journey to grief is unique, the solutions are similar. Take time for yourself, tell your story, ask for help when you need it, and always remember that it's not about what happened to you, it's about how you come back from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo, for your vulnerability and willingness to not only share your own story of grief, but also tell us that all of our own experiences with grief are valid, no matter how different they may look from one another. How we see and experience our lives are subjective, no matter if they take the form in our opinions, circumstances, or identities. As you could probably imagine, subjectivity also decides how the world may perceive us. Here to extrapolate one of these perceptions in the form of American racial categorization, please welcome to the stage sophomore Olivia Vinkier.
When I was in first grade, I remember learning my colors. We started by learning about the primary colors: red, yellow, and blue. Our teacher taught us how they were the pure colors of the rainbow. No two colors could be combined to create them. Our next task was to mix them into something more complex: green, purple, and orange. These secondary colors, especially green, stood out to me. I was fascinated by how two primary colors could be mixed together to create something nuanced and completely unique. When our teacher told us that our next task was to draw a picture of our family, I couldn't wait. I started by drawing my stick figure mom, dad, and brother, but then filled in the white space with something else. I'd used the washable paints I had mixed just a few minutes ago to create the colors of my family. I colored my mom yellow, my dad blue, and my brother and I green. Every time someone asks about my background, I'm reminded of that art class. My mom is 100% Ashkenazi Russian Jewish, and my dad is 50% Korean and 50% Belgian. So what does that make me? How should I describe myself? Where do I fit in among the color spectrum we were all taught in first grade?
By definition, race is a categorization of humans based on physical and social qualities. The term was first used to refer to speakers of a common language or to denote national affiliation. But by the 17th century, the term referred to physical traits. So am I white or am I Asian? The question of race has followed me around for as long as I can remember. Ever since I started taking standardized tests or filling out online surveys, I've been asked to select my race. And every time, I take a pause to think about which box I should choose. I'm white and Asian, but I'm not allowed to click both. So which do I pick? Well, when I was younger, I would always choose white. I simply concealed a portion of my identity to make my life easier. Instead of having to think about what other meant on those surveys, I would compress my identity into one single box. It was a quick and easy fix. But as I got older, I realized that other better reflected my multiracial background. But that choice of other comes at a cost. Even though I'm surrounded by loving and understanding people, every time I go to check that box, I'm forced to think of myself as other or someone who doesn't exactly fit in, like I'm some sort of anomaly or evidence of something strange. I don't want the world to see me as other or the given boxes on those surveys. I know there's so much more to me, but clearly society doesn't see it that way. They want a simplified view of who each of us are. But these days, are any of us that simple? One of my best friends says it perfectly. People are like an entire rainbow and shouldn't be defined by just one of their colors. The one-box rule from TESS surveys has confused multiracial people since the beginning of the US Census. For the longest time in America, you could only select one box when being asked about your race. The Census Bureau didn't start to allow choosing more than one box until the year 2000. 2000. That was only 22 years ago. Every multiracial person living in America before the year 2000 had to, at some point, fill out a form stating that they identify as one singular race. White, Black, Asian, Indigenous, Pacific Islander. For everyone in that situation, you probably chose one of those, reducing your racial makeup into one box. Or you chose other, like me, because you're an aware secondary color of the rainbow. So what does other mean? The definition is literally someone who is different than one already known about. But these people who choose other aren't different, like we're comparing apples to oranges. 10% of the American population is multiracial, which measures out to about 33.8 million people. Within that number, there are so many combinations of cultures and races, yet we're all forced to fit into one box. Not only is a multiracial person's experience different from those who are of one race, but that experience also varies from person to person. There's a wide spectrum forced to be contained into one small square, an effect that minimizes the racial experience. Look what just happened. The same color, but 5 different ways. Categorizing all multiracial people as other is just like saying that navy and periwinkle are the same shade of blue. And that number in America is rapidly growing each year. In the last 10 years, there's a 276% increase of multiracial identifying individuals. And it's estimated that by 2050, that number will grow by 4 times. At some point in the future, there will be more people choosing other than the handful of given boxes on those surveys. Though this ever-expanding rainbow is a beautiful thing, having all of those people have to categorize themselves as other in society is not. That's why I introduced a new idea of racial categorization in the form of an open-ended question. It would recognize a spectrum that's lacking in our world today. One study done by scientists Alicia Tran and others showed that an open-ended question provided an experience once deprived when being asked about race with only a few options. An open-ended question would give people an opportunity to express pride in their multiracial backgrounds. As our world continues to racially intertwine, we will reach a point where it will become impossible to categorize people by a handful of outdated and predetermined boxes. Even now, we're seeing a declining population of reds, yellows, and blues, and an increasing community of oranges, purples, and greens. As such, we can no longer expect people to define who they are by simply checking a primary color. Although race is a social construct built on a structure of assumptions and stereotypes, we cannot simply get rid of race altogether. However, the simplicity and ease of an open-ended question could truly lead our society into a more inclusive and accepting world that acknowledges the spectrum of racial identities. A world where all the shades of greens, purples, and oranges are just as recognized as the reds, yellows, and blues. Thank you.
The topic of racial and ethnic construct is relevant not only to our society, but to the entire world. So thank you, Olivia, for delving into the current barriers of categorization and the possibilities of a more inclusive spectrum of identities. Our final speaker of the night will illustrate the promising benefits of being willing to step outside your comfort zone. Please welcome Senior Sean Tabayoyoung.
My parents often told me regret is always in the end. As a kid, I didn't really understand that statement. I mean, who would? All 5-year-olds cared about was playing on the playground or eating chocolate ice cream, myself included. But as I got older, I slowly began to understand what my parents meant about regret. That is how quick it is, everyone. Just like this. We're in a life that just goes and goes, and yet most of us live like we have unlimited time and unlimited chances. Especially since the new year, how many of us made new promises? Many of us have goals we want to accomplish, yet we are not achieving these goals because we think of another opportunity. But do we really have a next time? We don't. We get too comfortable with our habits, thinking there's always tomorrow. But the sad truth is, we don't know that. We have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. The thought of it is even kind of weird. Whether it's school, food, we are so quick to not give things a chance. Like animals away from home, we instantly and constantly go back to what we know. But I mean, why wouldn't we, right? It's the only life we come to know. Until recent self-reflection, I did that too. I challenged myself to become uncomfortable, which eventually became the best decision I ever made. Trying new things, meeting new people, none of it would have been possible had I been too afraid. What holds people back is the fear of failure, the spirit of laziness. Most of the time, we're in our own heads, and it's impossible to progress further if something doesn't change. What's cool about this life is that we write what goes in our books. We determine our future, for better, for worse. Let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? This is middle school me. For me, middle school was a terrifying experience. One of the huge stepping stones to becoming a teenager. I mean, meeting new people, new environment, all of it seems scary. I wanted to talk to people, but that fear of failing was always in the back of my mind. How can I introduce myself? How can I stand out? But I decided to take the chance. I get to decide whether or not I'll make middle school memorable. And so, first period, I got the courage to sit next to someone I completely didn't know, and when I said, "Hi, my name is Sean, nice to meet you," I was greeted with a confused face that read, "Why is this weirdo talking to me?" You see, many of us think about the what ifs, and the same went for me. What if she thinks I'm a loser? What if she thinks I'm weird? Many of us think about the worst case scenarios, but never the best case. And in this case, she did say hello back to me, and to this day, we are good friends. This sense of risk-taking is essential for everyone. It is important for our growth. If I didn't take the risk of being uncomfortable, I would have had a new friend. Now, let's do another time skip. a little, put on a couple pounds of muscle, become a bit of a fashionista with my chain on my bow tie. However, I did keep one thing, and that was this amazing, beautiful face of mine. Anyways, freshman year, another huge stepping stone towards adulthood. Becoming a young adult, having more responsibilities, having colleges to think about, and the worst of all, it pains me to say, but no recess. Freshman year for me was very difficult due to the fact that it was, again, another new environment. I attended public schools my whole life, and I was the only kid from my middle school to attend St. Francis, which made it harder for me to meet new people. Everybody knew each other before high school due to being in the same middle school, but as for me, I had no one. As I tried to socialize with my classmates, I felt judged for trying to talk to these people, always getting these looks as if I did not belong. And so, freshman year, it was just how I thought it would be. Lonely. I felt judged for trying to talk to these people because it seemed that they already had their friend groups, and it felt weird to me to just introduce myself and say hi. To cope with my loneliness, I would usually visit my friends from my middle school. If there was ever a choice between a St. Francis activity or my old friend's school activity, I would always pick the one with my old friends. Having them made me feel like the way I was again. I was comfortable. However, I failed to realize that they'll eventually move on. I failed to realize that they'll meet people in their own environment, and sooner or later, they'll forget about me. Don't I get to start over too? Don't I deserve that fresh, clean slate they have? It was hard for me because those people were people I had close bonds with, countless memories with. I was comfortable. I began to wonder, should I stay and be confined in this circle of comfort, or should I push forward and start embracing the new? Deciding to turn a new chapter in my life, I decided to step out of my comfort zone, and it had to be one of the best decisions I ever made. Because look where it got me. I now have countless bonds and memories with the people here. Shout out to all my homies out there. They are all family to me. They are all family to me, and I am forever grateful for all of them. Let's do one more time skip. Senior year. I knew one day I would have to encounter this obstacle, and as time passes, I became a senior, and bam! Applications. This can for sure be one of the most stressful times for a high school senior. As crazy as it was for many people, my journey with college applications was even more difficult, as I had no guideline to follow. I will be the first person in my family to attend a college, which is an amazing opportunity. However, that also meant a lot of uncertainty. What colleges do I want to go to? What major do I even want to be in? How do I start the process? All of these thoughts rushed through my mind, and to be honest, I was lost. I was so confused and unsure about everything college related to the point where I just wanted to give up. Then I looked at my parents. My parents being immigrants and having me at a young age made me understand the struggles they had to endure through to provide for me. Providing food, education, opportunities. I saw that they were experiencing that same lost and uncertain feeling I had. Yet, look at them now, successful and hardworking. Their courage inspires me to push through the unknown. Seeing how my parents persevered through all obstacles made me see that even if we don't know what's in front of us, the only way to progress is by moving forward. And for college applications, I decided to embrace my sense of lostness and kept pushing through to get it done. And as you keep pushing through, sooner or later, you finish. I want everyone to look at themselves tonight. When you look at yourselves, understand that every choice you made, every chance you took, led you to the place you are right now. Are you at the place you want to be? Are you content with where you are? Why or why not? I've heard that many of us have dreams and goals that we want to accomplish, and it's up to us to prove it. But the clock is ticking, and it's needless to say we are running out of time. The truth is, many make it to this point, but only a few squeeze by. When is it time to stop chasing your dreams? And how do we know when to call it quits? Or is quitting even an option at this point, when you gave everything you had to something you would die for? What if we found something else that we love? Something that could be your calling, a direction that can lead to a future. How can we be so sure? The pain, the battles, the planning, the struggle. Life is so unpredictable, and there's something about not knowing that excites me. But having faith in your effort, believing in your hard work, and seeing your dreams finally come true, it really is possible. What I've come to find out is that we are all maps for the people who come after us, who tell us what not to do, and to point them in the right direction. A direction that can lead to a future, no matter what that may be. And as long as you live, don't let nobody steal your dreams. Take risks and become comfortable being uncomfortable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean, for encouraging us to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. In doing so, you have given us guidance toward achieving our goals. Before we say our final goodbye, we have a special message from our school president, Mr. Jason Curtis.
Good evening. On behalf of the entire St. Francis community, I want to express my gratitude, especially to our students who have worked so hard, not only on their presentations, but for all those students who have supported this production this evening. This is a remarkable event, and we are deeply grateful for all of the hard work that has been put in to make it so successful. I especially want to thank all of our adult educators who have mentored our students, especially Mrs. Schwartle. The inspiration that they have given us through their dedication and commitment throughout the entire process of preparing for tonight is truly a wonderful gift to our entire school. So while this marks the conclusion of this event, it is far from the end. For our St. Francis students who have shared their voices and made it possible for others to share theirs, this is a continuation of the leadership that we hope that they show in society, that they become leaders of impact, that they continue to go out into the world to share their thoughts and their ideas, and to make sure that other people's voices are heard as well, so that we share these gifts of ideas, that we may reflect, and that we may innovate as we go forward out into the world. For all of us who have been inspired by our students' voices, hopefully it's a beginning for us as well, that we take the inspiration that we've received, the grace of hearing our students share their thoughts and their ideas, and then we take it out into the world. Always, we hope that St. Francis remains a community where we can be inspired to reflect and to think, to value each other, to speak for justice, and to make sure that we continue to inspire others through all that we do. To everyone who has made tonight such a successful event, we thank you.
So this does mark the end of our program, but before we say our final goodbyes for the night, please welcome back the speakers of tonight's program, as well as our board members who have worked behind the scenes and stage doors to make the night special for us all. And so, what is the meaning of life? We all start somewhere, and the question has always existed. You may attempt to quantify it, scientific method, an underlying philosophy, verse, or idea. Whatever you may choose, let the curiosity guide you. We've learned that authentic conversation not only guides us to deeper relationships, but is the catalyst for self-reflection and ultimately in establishing our own personal definitions of the meaning of life. So, what will we see, hear, and make of the world around us? Well, ultimately, we'll leave that up to you.
We challenge you to take what you've learned tonight and use it to formulate your own meaning to life. We know this meaning will be an ever-changing philosophy, but take the opportunity to challenge your perspective. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Stand strong on your principles. Work for resilience and embrace authenticity in every facet of your life. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next year.